Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we will be learning today Emir Hashem Daf Kuf Samach Beis Amid Beis. We pick up today on Kuf Samach Beis Amid Aleph with a new Siman Tafresh Tzadik Vav, Dine Hesped V'Tainus, the halachos that apply to making Hespedim or fasting, V'Asiyas Melachah, or performing melachah, Purim on Purim, Ubayches Seifim, and here we have 8 Seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Purim muter ba'asiyas melachah. On Purim you are allowed to perform melachah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Aleph, muter ba'asiyas melachah, you're allowed to do melachah on Purim. Why? Da'af agav diksiv, mishteh v'simcha b'yom tov, even though in the Megillah it calls Purim Yemei Mishteh v'Simcha v'Yom Tov, Mikamakayim lo kiblu alehem la'asayis Yom Tov. The bottom line is they were not makabel Purim as a day of Yom Tov. Now, this is based on a pasuk, and I had in mind to have a Megillah here, and I have a whole host of others for but not a Megillah. Hang on one second. Okay, sorry for jumping away from the camera like that, something I rarely do, but I didn't have my Megillah handy, and I wanted to give you the pasuk. So, Megillus Esther, Parak Tes, pasuk Yud Tes. The Megillah says, Al Kain, therefore, because of the Nisim of Purim, Ha-Yehudim Ha-Prazim, the Yehudim that live in the Arei Ha-Prazim, the open cities, Ha-Yoshvim Ba'arei Ha-Prazais, they made the 14th day of the month of Adar, Simcha u'mishteh v'yom tov. They made it a day of Simcha, of rejoicing, mishteh, having a beautiful Suda, v'yom tov, and they made it a Yom Tov. U'mishlach manos ish l'reyehu. That's Pasuk Yud Tes. But then, a few psukim later, in Pasuk Chav Beis, when the Megillah speaks about the Kabbalah that Klal Yisrael had going forward, Pasuk Chav says, Vayichtov Mordechai es advarim ha'eleh. Mordechai wrote the whole story of Purim. Vayishlach svarim el kala Yehudim asher b'chol medinos hamelachah Achashverosh hakroivim v'harechaikim, and he sent them instructions lekayim aleihem, to establish upon them, liyos oisim, so that they should make, as yom arba asar lechodesh Adar ve'es yom chamisha asar boi, the 14th of Adar and the 15th of Adar, b'chol shana v'shana, every year going forward. And now we come to Pasuk Chav Beis, kayomim asher nachu behem haYehudim me'oivehem, like the days that of what occurred in the time of the Nes of Purim, when Klal Yisrael, when the Yehudim rested me'oivehem from their enemies and oppressors, v'hachodesh. Well, something just happened over there. My light fell off. Okay. Always something when you change locations. V'achodesh, and the month, asher nepach lahem, that was overturned for them, me'yagayin l'simcha, from a time of worry to a time of rejoicing, u'me'eva l'yom tov, and from the time of mourning to a yom tov, l'asayisam, to make them, and now here come the critical words, Yemei mishteh v'simcha, days of mishteh, of having a suda, v'simcha, and rejoicing, u'mishlayach manos ish l'reyehu u'matanos le'evyonim. So in this pasuk, where the Megillah is discussing what the takana would be going forward, it does not say that they made them days of Yom Tov. It says, L'asayisam yemei mishteh v'simcha, and Mishlach Manis Ishlariyeu and Matanis Levyonim, but it does not say La'asais Oisam Yom Tov. So while it's true that originally they made it as a Yom Tov, but going forward, Klal Yisrael was not Makabel Purim to be a Yom Tov. A Yom Tov would mean it would carry with it an Isser Melachah. Since they were not Makabel it as a Yom Tov, it did not carry with it an Isser Melachah. Now, it's very interesting. Why is it that they weren't makabelit as a day of Yom Tov. If originally it was intended to be a day of Yom Tov, like we see from Pasuk Yotes, why is it that in the end they were not mekabel it to be a Yom Tov? So the Orchos Chaim writes that the reason is because that takana would have been a gzeira she'iev she'roiv hatzibur lamid by. That would have been too difficult for Roiv Hatzibur, especially since many Dirs of Klal Yisrael, they were very much affected by poverty. Remember, Purim is a Yom Tov that began in Golus. The whole nace of Purim occurred in Golus. And going forward, Purim was going to be celebrated in Golus. And for the probably the vast majority of the centuries of Golus, Klal Yisrael was always constantly afflicted by poverty, and therefore to be mavatal from melachah was something very difficult. It was ef sheroiv hatzira lamoid boy, so that gezerah did not stick, and that's why the Mishnah Berurah says here, the Mechaber says, Purim me'ikar hadin mutter ba'asiyas melachah, and the Mishnah Berurah explained here in Eis Katan Aleph, afagav diksiv mishter v'simcha v'yom tov, even though in Pasuk Yotes it does say Yom Tov, but the bottom line is they were not mekabel as Yom Tov, like we could see in Pasuk Chav Beis, where the Pasuk does not say that they were mekabel Yom Tov. Ochein, however, achar zman, after the passage of time, nohagu me'atzman be'ezeh mekaymois shaloi lasos. Later on, in many places, Klal Yisrael was mekabel on Isser Malacha, and the Achronim bring down this was because of the tremendous chavivus of Purim, the special love that Klal Yisrael has for the Yom Tov of Purim. They ended up being mekabel on Isser Malacha. I just want to adjust the camera here a second. I'm sorry. Sorry for these interruptions. Please bear with me. I had to change locations today. I'm downstairs instead of upstairs in my recording studio. So this is the setup that I usually use during the summer on my laptop, and somehow something didn't work out right. But whatever it is, it's working now. Okay, now, this whole discussion that we're having about the Isser Malacha on Purim, it all comes from the Gemara in Megillah, primarily on Daf Hey Amid Beis. The Gemara begins on the very bottom of Hey Amid Aleph. The Gemara says over from Rebbe. Amar Rebbe Chanina said, Rebbe nata netiya bepurim. Rebbe planted, I believe it's netiya is usually a tree, so Rebbe planted the shoot of a tree on Purim. And that begins a whole topic of conversation here on Daf Hey Amid Beis about the Isser Malacha on Purim, whether there is an Isser Malacha or whether there is not Isser Malacha. So now let's go further here in the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, so we've established that Me'ikar Adin mutter ba'asiyas Malacha. However, says the Mechaber, uvemokim shenagu shaloi lasos, like we just saw, there were places where they were not to do malacha. Then, says the Mechaber, then ein oisen. Now, where do we find a source that there were those who were makabel on themselves not to do malacha? So again, in that Gemara on Hey Amid Beis, the Gemara is trying to figure out Rebbe planted a netiya, but at the same time, the Gemara says, where is it? A Gemara brings down a Maisa that happened with Rav. The Gemara says, V'harav, we have a story that occurred with Rav. Chazye lahu gavra, he saw an individual to have a kashadi kisna b'puria, that he was planting flax. Kisna is linen, is flax. He was planting flax on Purim, Velatye, and he cursed him. He cursed him for planting on Purim. Veloit samach kisne, and due to that curse that came from Rav, the kisna did not grow. So now we have a problem over here. How is it that we have Rebbe who was not a netiya on Purim? So it would seem that malach on Purim is mutter, and now we have Rav cursing somebody for planting kisna on Purim. So the Gemara says, the Gemara gives a few different answers, but one answer that the Gemara gives is, the Gemara says, Ve'ela Rav my time alatye lahu gavra. Why did Rav curse that individual? Devarim hamutarin va'acherim nahagu b'hen iser hava. This was something that me'ikar adin is mutter, but there were places where they had a minig to aser malacha on Purim, and that's why Rav cursed him. Rebbe, uba asrei de Rebbe, in Rebbe's makam, loy nog. Rebbe came from a place where they were not noyig iser. Rav was in a place where they were noyig iser. So Rebbe planted an atiyah. Rav saw somebody planting flax in a makam shenagu iser, and that's why he cursed him. Okay, so that's where we have a source for the idea that there is a makam shenagu shalai lasais, and the Mechaber says in such a place ein oisen, and continues the Ramah, and the Ramah says the idna nowadays. What's our status nowadays? Says the Ramah, the idna nowadays nagu b'chol makam shalai lasais. We are noyig in all areas a prohibition to do melachah on Purim. We are noyig like a makam shaloi lasais. And now the Mechaber continues. V'ha'oiseh, somebody who does do malacha, and a simple reading of the Mechaber would say that the Mechaber is referring to a place where they would noyig iser, right? The Mechaber said it's mutter ba'asiyas malacha, but in a makam shenagu shaloi lasais ein oisin. Now, says the Mechaber, v'ha'oiseh, somebody who does do malacha in a makam shenagu shaloi lasais, eina raya simin bracha me'oisa malacha. He will not see bracha from that malacha la'olam. He will never see bracha. And that is very much in line with what we just read from the Gemara. There was this fellow who was planting flax in a makam shaloi lasais malacha. Rav saw him. Rav cursed him. And what happened? The flax never grew. Why? Because eina raya simin bracha la'olam. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois cotton bays in a makam shenagu shaloi lasais ein oisin v'ayidei akum shari. However, to do malacha through the agency of a non-Jew, that would be mutter. Ois cotton gimel b'chol makam shaloi lasais. The Ramah said nowadays we're noyig b'chol makam shaloi lasais malacha. However, the Chavetz Chaim starts right away to give us some exceptions. First of all, uprakmatya, to do business. So somebody has merchandise that he wants to sell, mutter, that is mutter. Why? Shesimcha hiloi. Because that is simcha. The primary reason why we would aser malacha on Purim is because we want everybody to be oisik in the simcha of Purim. No, we're going to see very shortly that the Mechaber is going to give certain exceptions. Certain types of malacha are mutter on Purim because they are inherently misameach. They are malacha of simcha. So pragmatia, says the Mishnah Berurah, and he brings this down from the Taz, pragmatia is a simcha. Somebody's very happy when he gets to sell his merchandise. Memela, says the Mishnah Berurah, pragmatia is mutter shesimcha hiloi. And if we go into the Sharetzion, Ois Katan Gimel, he brings this down from the Taz Ushari Achroinim, and then he brings down, Oid, furthermore, Kasav Prima Gadim, the Prima Gadim writes, the Chol Davar Shiyah by Hefsid. Anytime you need to do malacha to prevent a loss, what we call in the parlance of Chalamayid, a Davar Ha'avud, anytime you have to do malacha because if you don't, you're going to suffer a loss, Shari, that would also be mutter. The Chol Davar Simcha, mutter b'Purim. Anything that is going to cause simcha is mutter on Purim. Somebody has a davar avud, right? That's going to cause him tsar if he's going to take a loss. So if he does malacha to prevent the loss, that's a simcha. So memelo davar avud is mutter. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Daled, Siman Bracha. If you do malacha in a place where the minig is not to do malacha, then the Mechaber said, Eina roya Siman Bracha be'oisa malacha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kigoyin, for example, Im zayreya eza davar eino matzmiach. If you plant something, it won't grow. The Gemara in Megillah. Person was planting kisna, Rav gave him a klala, and it never grew. He's not going to see a siman bracha. Aval Rav Eliyahu Mizrahi writes, She'enoi marviach, he will not profit from the malacha that he does. Aval Eino mafsid gamkein, but he will not take a loss. That's what Rav Eliyahu Mizrahi writes. Okay, let's turn to Kuf Samach Beis, Amid Beis. Now, go to Kosavach Beis Amud Beis on the top line, and we see some exceptions. The Mechaber says, you can't, Me'ikra din, you're allowed to do melachah. There are places that are noyig shaloi lasis malacha. If you do malacha in a place where the minig is shaloi lasis malacha, you're not going to see a siman bracha. Said the Ramah, nowadays we're noyig like mekaimos shenagu shaloi lasis malacha. We have the din nowadays of a makom shenagu shaloi lasis malacha. You're not allowed to do malacha on Purim. But, says the Mechaber, Ella imhu binyan shel simcha. Let's say you want to be Isaac bebinyan. You want to do construction. Construction is certainly a malacha of the type that would be aser on Purim in a makom shenagu shaloi lasis malacha. However, says the Mechaber, imhu binyan shel simcha, if you want to do the building of a binyan shel simcha, what's a binyan shel simcha? Kegayin, for example, beis chasnus libnoi. Somebody is building a beis chasnus. The Mefarshim, the Rishonim always say that a beis chasnus is, in the days of the Mishnah and the Gemara, when somebody was marrying off his son, he built a place to make the chuppah, and it was also like an apartment that the chassan and the kala would stay in after the chasana, at least for the Shivas Yemei HaMishteh. That was what was called the beis chasnus, the chassid kala apartment. So, if you're building a beis chasnus libnoi, avravniki shel malachim, or you're planting a tree that is the canopy for malachim. What does that mean? We'll see in the Mishnah Berurah. Deshari, that kind of malacha would be mutter. Now, let's realize, this kind of construction has absolutely nothing to do with Purim. It's not mutter because it's a tzarech of Purim. It's mutter because this kind of construction is inherently simchadik. If you're building a beis chasnus libnai, that's very joyous, and therefore it's appropriate for Purim. It's not inappropriate. It's something that causes simcha. If it causes simcha, it's appropriate for Purim. The avravniki shel malachim is a tree of some kind that you plant that gives shade. I guess it's kind of like a beautiful place to sit outside in the backyard. That's an atiyah shel simcha. That's planting something shel simcha that is, appropriate for Purim. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Hey. Varniki shel malachim shenoitim litzel. This is something that you plant for shade. Lehistoifef bitziloi, to go and take shelter and have enjoyment, to have rest and relaxation under the tzel of this type of tree. Okay, let's see the Ramah, second line down. Hakah. Umutter lasois kol meleches mitzvah. You're also allowed to do any kind of malacha that's required for the fulfillment of a mitzvah. Kegayin, for example, lichtov piskei halachos. Let's say somebody sent you a shaila and you have to write a tshuva. You're allowed to write a tshuva on Purim. V'chein mutter lasois afilu malachis gemurais litzarich Purim. And certainly you're allowed to do a malacha, even a malacha gemura, like havara, making a fire, cooking, bishul, any kind of malacha that's litzorich Purim, writing a Megillah, any kind of malacha that's litzorich Purim, you are certainly allowed to do. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Vav, Piskei Halachos. The Ramah mentioned you could write Piskei Halachos. Like I said, you could write a tshuva. Upshatei hamikra, you could write Pshatei hamikra. You want to write divrei Torah on the Megillah, even if they're very basic. Pshatei, Pashat Pshat, you're allowed to do it. V'igeres shalom, you're allowed to write a friendly letter. Umazkeres chayvaisav, you're allowed to record your debts. If you borrowed money from somebody on Purim, or you purchased something on credit on Purim, you're allowed to record it so that it should not be forgotten. Priyas chayv mitzvahu, paying back your debts is a mitzvah, and certainly you're required to keep track of your debts, lest you forget a debt and never repay it. So this is all considered mitzvah, and therefore this kind of ksiva would certainly be mutter. V'chein kol davar shein tzarich iyun gadol, so too any other kind. It seems that what the Chavetz Chaim is saying here, anything else that you want to write that doesn't require iyun gadol. V'kasa b'sidr amudei shamayim. Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes in the Sidr amudei shamayim, you should not get too involved in these things, Purim, so that you should be mavatel from the simcha of Purim. Let's remember, it's Purim. We have to be misameach over the nisim of Purim. Megillah mutter lichtoi b'Purim. You are allowed to write a Megillah on Purim. Okay. Let's do another sif, and then that will close out the topic of Asiyas Melachah on Purim, and then we'll discuss it a little bit. Let's go to Sif Beis, 3 lines down the middle of the line, says the Mechaber. Afilu b'makayim shenagu, even in a place where the noig iser melachah on Purim, lo'inagu ela b'yoyim mikra megillah bilvad. The iser of asiyas melachah in a makayim shenagu iser is only on the day that they read the Megillah. So if you live in an arei haprazi, if you live in an open city, so the iser melachah would be on your dalit. Tesvav, you could do melachah. You live in an Irmuk Avchayma Mimais Yeshua Benun, the Mikra Megillah is on Tesvav, so then the Isser Malacha would be on Tesvav, but not on your Dalit. So Afilu B'makim Shenagu Loinagu Elabiyoy Mikra Megillah Balvad. Avalesar Ezeh, Avalesar Eshel Zeh Bazeh. But Ta'aser, let's say your Dalit in an Irmuk Avchayma, or vice versa, Einoi Minig. The Mechaber says that is not a valid minig at all. The Isser Malacha is only on the day of Mikra Megillah. Says the Mishnah Berurah in a minig. However, the Yesh Machmirin Bazeh, he brings down that there are some that are Noyig Chumra. And in the Ber Hetiv, this is brought down from the Maharil and the Abu Darham. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Nira, and it seems to him, the Talib minig Oisei HaMakayim, that again, the whole Isser Malacha is a question of the minig of that particular makam. So if there is a makam that has a minig to aser both days, so then we follow that minig and you taka aser both days. Now I wanted to read from the Aruch HaShulchan as far as the Isser of Asiyas Malacha. The Aruch HaShulchan writes like this. In Sif Aleph, the Aruch HaShulchan writes, Purim mutter ba'asiyas malacha. You're allowed to do malacha on Purim. V'af agav diksiv mishta v'simcha v'yom tov. V'yom tov ha'aser ba'asiyas malacha. Amnam be'emes yom tov lo kabilu alayu. Like we said, they weren't mekabel yom tov. V'raya, and there's a raya to this, like I told you, diksiv, because the pasuk says, the pasuk of Beis, lekayem aleihem, las oisam yemei mishta v'simcha v'yom tov lo ksiv. Okay. Mikamakim b'makim shenagu shalai lasis malacha asar lasois v'oisei nerayis siman bracha la'olam malachazu v'kasvu hakadmainim, and the kadmainim write af agav de malacha loy kabilu alayhu, even though lamaisa they weren't makabel on themselves in Isser malacha, achakach niskabel b'minhag. Later on, it became a kabbalah. They were noyig Isser malacha. Umekalalin kala oisa by malacha, and they gave a curse to anyone who does malacha, kevet shepashat yisurai b'chol Yisrael, because it became nispashit in Gans Klal Yisrael not to do malacha on Purim. And therefore, the Chazal, and we saw this in the Gemara, in the person of Rav, they gave a curse to anyone who will do malacha on Yom Tov, and like on Purim, and we saw that ein araya siman bracha me'oisa malacha la'olam. Amnam, however, binyan shel simcha, if you want to be oisik in a binyan shel simcha, kegoyin beis chastus lebnai avavarniki shel sarim, mutter, because it's a binyan shel simcha, v'chal meleches mitzvah mutter, kegoyin ksiva shel mitzvah, mutter lichtoi piskei halachos, upshatei hamikrais, she'adam saimeach bahem, because these are all things that a person takes simcha in. Kidiksiv, pekudei Hashem yesharim mesamchei leiv, v'gerish shel shel shalom, v'askaras chayvoisav, v'chein chol davar she'ed tzarech in gadol nirish mutter. U'letzarech hayoim, atzmai, anything that's a tzarech of Purim, mutter lasois afilu malachos gemurais, afa pisha hayev shal lasois on mikaydem. V'chein bepragmatia, to do business with merchandise, ein minig lesar, mipnei shu simchaloi. U'lechein, and therefore, says Aruch HaShulchan, na'agu leishev b'chanuyos, the minig became that if you have a store, you're allowed to keep your store open and do business. Hasam archaisav, somebody who's very careful to comport himself in a Torah-dika manner, yema'it b'yeshiva sachanus b'purim, he should be memayit. V'yesh yirei Hashem she'ein paischan achanus b'purim, v'ayidei en Yehudi mutar lasos melacha. So we do have this concept of Isser Malacha. In the Dirshu footnotes, brings down from Rechaim Kanievsky that the Geder of the Isser Asiyas Malacha on Purim is similar to the Geder of the Isser Malacha on Chalamoid. And like we saw, Davra Ovid is mutter, a Malacha that's Tzarech Purim is mutter, something that's not so much of a Tircha Yisera. We said Ksiva, that's not She'en Baitz Iyun Gadol, is mutter. But there is a concept of an Isser Asiyas Malacha on Purim, and that is something that people have to be aware of. Sif Gimel. Says the Mechaber, Yom Yodalid v'Yom Tesvav, the 14th of Adar and the 15th of Adar, Asurim behesped v'tainus. You're not allowed to make hespedim on Yodalid or Tesvav, and this is both for open cities and walled cities. V'tainus, you're not allowed to fast on Yodalid or Tesvav. L'chol Adam, for all people, b'chol makayim, in all places. Bein livdei krachim, whether they live in walled cities, shem oisit tesvav bilvad, who keep only the 15th as Purim, bein libnei ayaros, or whether for the people who live in open cities, shehem oisim yodalad bilvad, who make Purim only on the 14th. It doesn't matter. Either way, both yodalad and tesvav are aser in hesped and tainus. V'hanoshim ma'anois bahem, if Nebuch le'aleinu Rachman litzlan, there's a levaya on Yudalit or Tesvav, the women ma'anois bahem. They could be ma'anois. What does ma'anois mean? Explains to Mechaber, shekulan oinois ka'achas. It means that they all wail and they all say phrases of lamentation together at the same time. Not that one leads and the others respond. Umetapchais, and the women are allowed to clap. Shamakois kaf al kaf, they're allowed to clap in mourning. Avaloi mekainenais, however, the women are not allowed to be mekainen. What does mekainen mean? Shetei achas medaberes, that's when there's one woman who is a leader, so she calls out some phrases of mourning and lamentation. V'kulan oinois achareha, and all the women respond and repeat what she said. That's to be mekainenais. Mekainenais you're not allowed to do even by a levaya when the mace is mutal lefanov. So again, if you're not allowed to make hespedim, you're not allowed to fast on Yodalit or Tesvav. If there's a levaya, so there's a certain level of wailing and mourning that you're allowed to do. What is that? The women could be ma'ainanais, but they cannot be mekainanais. The Gemara always says that mekainanais is the ikar hispeda, when there's a leader and those who answer. That you're not allowed to do, even by a levaya when the mace is mutal lefanov. Nikbar hames, once the mace is buried, loy ma'anois v'loy mekainanais, you're not allowed to do anything. Says the Mishnah Berurah behesped. Yodalin and Tesvav are aser in hesped. Umakim shenagu shebiyam shvi holchem ala kever l'kainen. In a place where they had the minig that on the 7th day of Shiva, when the Avelim get up from Shiva, they had a minig to go out to the base olam and to be mekainen by the kever. Aser b'Purim. If the last day of Shiva is Purim, you're not allowed to do that on Purim. It's not a levaya. The mace is not befonov. The mace is already buried, so you're not allowed to do this on Purim. Ella, but ha'avel levadai yelech lisham im chazan echad. The avel or the avelim could go themselves together with a chazan. The yomar loy hashkava, and the chazan could make a kel mole. That's what hashkava means. It's the tefillos of Yizkar. The chazan could go and he could make a mole by the kever just with the avelim, but nobody else. Va'afilu be'erev Purim lo yelech lisham. Even if the 7th day of Shiva is erev Purim, you should not go out to the basic forest. Why? Shalo yakshivu ha'olam, so that people should not make a mistake and think sha'avelus nifsak bePurim, that Purim breaks avelus. What does this mean? When did you typically go to a base olam on erev Yom Tov? So we know from learning Moed Katan, those who learned Daf Yomi, that, or when we learned Hilchas Yom Tov breaks avelus, right? If somebody somebody loses a loved one that he has to sit Shiva for, if he starts sitting Shiva before Yom Tov, so then even if he only sits Shiva for an hour, as soon as Yom Tov comes, the Shiva is over. And then after Yom Tov, he picks up with Shloshim. But the Shiva is over as soon as Yom Tov hits. Now, because Yom Tov breaks Avelos, there was a minhag that if somebody was in Avelos on Erev Yom Tov, so let's say somebody lost Chas v'Chalila, a parent, now he has to sit Shiva, right? So let's say Erev Yom Tov is the second day of Shiva. So Erev Yom Tov in the morning, now his Shiva is going to end because Yom Tov is coming. So it's like it's the last day of Shiva. So he would go to the Beis HaKvaros. Say when normally he would go to the Beis HaKvaros on the last day of Shiva. Now, even though it's only day 2, it's his last day of Shiva because Yom Tov is coming. So he would go to the Beis Olam. So we don't want somebody to go to the Beis Olam on Erev Purim. Because if an Oval Toich Shiva will go to the Beis HaKvaros on Erev Yom Tov, people are going to see him going and they're going to say, oh, you mean Erev Purim is like any other Erev Yom Tov. Even though this guy is holding in the middle of Shiva, maybe it's only the 3rd day of Shiva, why is he going to the Beis HaKvaros on Tainus Esther, on Erev Purim? It must be because Purim is going to break the Shiva, and now it's like his Shiva is over. So that's why he's going to the Beis HaKvaros. But that's not true. Purim does not break Shiva. If somebody is took Shiva and Purim comes, we're going to see that we paskin that on Purim he's not Noyek Avelus, but the Shiva continues. And Purim counts as one of the days of Shiva, and you keep on counting. So Purim does not break Avelus. It doesn't break Shiva, it doesn't break Shloshim. And we don't want people to make that mistake. Ois Kat and Tes, the Mechaber said that Yudalit and Tesvav are also betainis. However, when it comes to the question of a tainis chaloim, that somebody wants to keep to nullify a bad dream, we discussed it over there, Mishnah Berurah, and we said you could fast a tainis chaloim until a little bit before nightfall, and then you have to eat a suda. V'din tamid chacham b'fanav, as far as being maspid a tamid chacham b'fanav on Purim, if a tamid chacham died on Purim, Ayin b'Yerdei Siman Taf Aleph, where there are exceptions made for a tamid chacham b'fanav on Purim. Okay, Sif Daled, says the Mechaber. Kol divrei avelus nohagim b'Chanukah uPurim. The shita of the Mechaber is that all of the halachos of avelus are noyeg both on Chanukah and on Purim. Hago, says the Rama. Nevertheless, Yelech lebeis hakneses lishmaya hamegillah, even though the Mechaber says that in his opinion all of the halachos of avelus are noyeg on Purim, still the oval should go to shul to hear the Megillah. But, continues the Rama, ve'im yuchal lesef minyan lebeisai likrois hamegillah adiv tvei. If he could pull together a minyan in his house to hear the Megillah, even though we always say, especially on Purim, Baroivam Hadras Melech is a big deal, and therefore normally we don't want somebody to hear the Megillah in a private minyan in his house. We want him to go to shul. But if somebody, Nebuchadnezzar Elenu, is in Avelus, he's Tosh Shiva, so if he could pull together a minyan in his house to hear Megillah, that would be Adif Tvei. So far we have over here the Shita of the Mechaber. The Shita of the Mechaber is Avelus is Noyeg on Purim. Having said that, the Ramah says, even according to the Mechaber, the Oval should go to shul to hear Megillah if he cannot arrange a minyan to hear Megillah in his house. If he can arrange a minyan to hear Megillah in his house, that would be better. Now continues the Ramah says, however, there are those that say, she'ein avelus noig b'Purim, that avelus is not noig on Purim. Loi b'Yudalid, v'loi b'Tesvav. Not on Yudalid, not on Tezvav, whether you're in a prazi or whether you're in a mukaf chayma. It doesn't matter. There are those that say that Avelus is not noyig, not on Purim, not on Shushan Purim. And the Ramah says, v'chein noyagin, and that's the way we are noyig. Furthermore, the Ramah says, va'afilu Avelus yom rishon, even the Avelus of the first day of Shiva, which is always treated more chamor, nidche b'pnei Purim, the Ramah says it is nidche, it is pushed aside because of Purim, and Avelus is not noyig. Having said that, says the Ramah, aval dvarim shebetzina noyig. Dvarim shebetzina, avelus in privacy, in private manners, let's say tashmish hamita, marital relations, that would be something that you would be noyeg avelus. Okay, we can stop there for a moment. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. So again, we had the sheet of the Mechaber. The Mechaber holds that avelus is noyeg on Purim. The Ramah said, even according to the sheet of the Mechaber, that avelus is noyeg on Purim. So if the Oval could arrange a minyan for Mikra Megillah in his house, fine, he should stay in his house. If he can't, he should go to shul. Then the Ramah said, there are those that hold that avelus is not noyeg on Purim at all, except for dvarim shebetzina. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Yud. Yelech lebeis hakneses lishmaya. Umashakasa b'sifhei b'soifai. We're going to see that in Sifhei, at the end of Sifhei, the Ramah is going to say, the lamacharos lo yetze mi pesach beisai. The Ramah is going to make the statement that on the day of Purim, an oval should not leave his house. That's referring to a case where the oval has a minyan in his house to hear Megillah. After Ba'alma Kriya B'tzibur Adif Tvei. Even though normally, like we said, B'Rayv Amadus Melach, it's better to go out B'tzibur, the oval should not go out to hear B'tzibur. Ais Katan Yud Aleph HaMegillah, the Ramah said that the oval could go out to shul to hear the Megillah. Aval Tfilas Ma'ariv Yispal B'Beisai. So again, we're talking about an oval who cannot gather a minyan in his house. So he should daven at home. For the Megillah, he should go out to hear the Megillah B'tzibur. I've cut your base. V'yesh oimrim she'ein. There are those that say that avelus is not noyeg on Purim. V'chein noyegin, and that's how we are noyeg. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Av she'habach v'oid achroinim kosvu. Even though the Bach and other achroinim write, she'b'mekaymam hoya haminig lehis abel, that in their regions the minig was to takabi noyeg avelus. Av kvar kosa b'shari tshuva b'shem kama achroinim lahakol. The Shari Tshuva, in the name of many Achronim, wrote that we could be mekel and would not noyeg avelus on Purim. V'shekein pashat haminig b'medina is elu. In our regions, that is the minig. Ubefrat be'inyan chalitzas min olim. Certainly, when it comes to things like not wearing shoes, v'yeshiva al gabe karka, or sitting down on a low chair or on the ground, bevadai en lahachmer, we should certainly not be machmer on Purim. Umikamokim, nevertheless, yir elamayit b'minei simcha she'oisin. However, the Purim should be a subdued Purim. I will never forget the Purim by the Ptira of Rav Moshe, Zechet Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Vracha, who was nifter on Tainus Esther. We spent the whole Tainus Esther being Isaac in the Levaya, and then we got back to Yeshiva in Staten Island very late from the airport, and we had to go and make a Purim. We had to go make a Purim. We went from crying over the loss of the Gadol Adar and our Rebbe here in Yeshiva Staten Island. We went from that to being Misameach on Purim. It was unbelievable. It was the strangest experience. I'll never forget it. Kasav b'tshuvas binyan olam. Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, Zechet Tzadik L'Vracha, was a great Mekubal who lived in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Kasa b'tshuvas binyan olam. He writes in Siman Lamed Hey, le'inyan likrois ha'aval ha'megillah b'beis hakneses. Can an oval be the Baal Koirei? Im ein sham acher sheyedeh likrois kol kach b'nekudais u'b'ta'amim u'b'diktika oisiyos. If you don't have anybody else who could be a Baal Koirei like this oval, tov yoseh sheyikrena oval. It would taka be better that the oval should be the Baal Koirei. Like we find that an oval is allowed to be the chazan on Shabbos and Yom Tov if there's nobody else who could do it like him. So too when it comes to be a Baal Koirei for the Megillah, if you need the oval to do it, he can. We learned earlier that he should not make the brachas, because it's inappropriate for the oval to make a shechiyanu and to be moitzi the rabbim and the shechiyanu, so other people, somebody else should make the brachas for the tzibur, and everybody, including the Baal Koirei, will say Amen, and then the oval will be the Baal Koirei. Eis cut Yud Gimel. The Ramah said, even according to our minig, that we are noyeg avel, that we're not noyeg avelus on Purim. Dvarim shebetzina noyeg. Hine Taz Kasav. The Taz writes, the halicha mi beisei l'tfila aser gam l'deyazu. even according to this opinion that the Ramah is bringing down, that we are not noyeg avelus and we're only noyeg dvarim shebetzina, the Taz writes that to go to shul for davening, not for mikra megillah, for davening is also. V'loy mikri zeh b'farhesia, and that's not called avelus b'farhesia, that would be mutter on Purim. D'loy minkar shoyse came misham avelus, because the fact that he didn't show up in shul, not everybody is going to realize that it's because of avelus. Maybe he slept late. Over Magen Avram Kasav Damashba Betur, the Beshachar is Holich Lebeis HaKnesses L'Ispal. The Magen Avram writes that in the Torah it is mashma that he should go to the Beis HaKnesses in the morning. V'ayin b'Pri Megadim shekasav dahameka lehistai ken lehifsid. Pri Megadim writes somebody who is noyeg like this Magen Avram, and he's in Avelus Toich Shiva, and he goes for davening Purim morning to shul, lo yifsid, he will not lose from it. The Chei Kasav b'derech hachayim, the Shachar is Holich L'Tfila b'Beis HaKnesses. Okay, now we go weiter in the Ramah. Says the Ramah. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 lines from the bottom, last 2 words. Even though, like the Ramah said, the minig is not to be noyeg avelus at Purim, oilaloi leminyan shiva yemei avelus kemoi Shabbos. The days of Yudalad and Tezvav do count as days of Shiva. Same way Shabbos counts as a day of Shiva. So they do count as Shiva days. The Chei Pasuk Harav Ba'atzmai B'tur Yeridei Siman Tav Aleph, and the Ramah says that the Mechaber himself rules like this in Yeridei and Hilchas Avelus Siman Tav Aleph Sif Zayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut Yudalad. Oilaloi leminyan Shiva. These days count towards the days of Shiva. Afilu meis bepurim. This is true even if Nebuch Aleinu, somebody lost a loved one that he's mechuyev to sit Shiva for on Purim. Now what's the afilu? Very simple. If somebody Nebuch Aleinu lost a relative on Yom Tov, on Sukkot, on Pesach, then the Shiva does not even start. If Yom Tov breaks Shiva, one Shiva starts, then alakas kama v'kama, kolshkein, kal v'chomer, avelus cannot begin on Yom Tov. So if somebody loses a relative on Yom Tov, the Shiva does not start until after Yom Tov. So the days of Yom Tov do not count. Therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah over here, not so on Purim. If somebody loses a relative on Purim, Purim does count as the first day of Shiva. Now we go to Sif Hey. Says the Mechaber, 2 lines from the bottom. Imchal Purim b'Motzei Shabbos. If Purim falls out on Sunday, so it begins on Motzei Shabbos. Now, we know the halacha is, even though, well, we do this, an oval, Toich Shiva, is allowed to go to shul on Shabbos, because to not go to shul would be avelus b'farhesia. So an oval is allowed to go to shul on Shabbos. He goes to shul on Shabbos. So now, says the Mechaber like this. Imchal Purim b'Motzei Shabbos. If Purim is on Sunday, so it begins on Motzei Shabbos. V'ha'ovel yosheh b'beis HaKnesses b'Shabbos b'mincha. And now the oval is in shul Shabbos afternoon for Shabbos mincha. Oh, the Mechaber says, lo yetze misham. He shouldn't leave shul ad sheyispal tfilas arvis until he davens ma'ariv v'yishma kriyas Megillah, and he hears Megillah. So what the Mechaber is saying like this. Normally we say that an oval who's sitting at home, and now it's Purim, he should not go to shul for ma'ariv. He could go to shul for Megillah if he can't pull together a minyan in his house for Megillah. But ma'ariv, he should not go to shul for ma'ariv. But, says the Mechaber, what if he's in shul anyway? Why is he in shul? Because Purim is Motzei Shabbos. So he was in shul for mincha Shabbos afternoon. So does he have to go home and then stay home for ma'ariv and then come back for mikra Megillah? Says the Mechaber, no. You're in shul already for mincha, stay in shul, daven ma'ariv, and hear mikra Megillah, and then go home. And then the Mechaber finishes off Sif Hey, ulamakaras, and now tomorrow, lo yetze min Pesach Beisai. Now that you went home Purim night, so tomorrow you're back to the regular din of an oval. Tomorrow, you're not going to leave your house. And like we saw earlier, not leave the house means if he could get a minyan for mikra Megillah, he should stay home. If he can't get a minyan for mikra Megillah, he should go to shul for Megillah. Or according to the Magen Avram, he should even go to shul for Shachris. Okay. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Tes Vav. Lo Yetze Misham. Din Zek Savay Rekech. This halacha that the Mechaber is saying comes from the Rekech. Now, the Mishnah Berurah writes, there's an interesting catch here. The Mechaber is saying that since the Ovel is in the shul for Shabbos Mincha, he should just stay in shul. But wait a second, how about Shal Shudas? He has to go eat Shal Shudas. Doesn't he have to go home for Shal Shudas? Now, if you remember from where we learned Hilchos Shabbos, there's actually a machlokes when you're supposed to eat Shal Shudas. Are you supposed to eat Shal Shudas before Mincha or after Mincha? Now, it happens to be that the Mechaber holds that you eat Shal Shudas before Mincha. So, like the Mechaber, this is very good. The Ovel ate Shal Shudas at home. Then he went to shul for Mincha. Now there's no reason for him to go back home. So stay in shul until Ma'ariv. But if you don't paskin like the Mechaber, if you paskin that you eat Shal Shudas after Mincha, so then l'chayra the Ovel has to go home to eat Shal Shudas. So says the Mishnah Berurah, Din Zek Savay HaRekeach. This halacha comes from the Rekeach. Uvimekaymai, and in the locale of the Rekeach, hayu oichlid su the shlishis kaida Mincha. They were noyig to eat Shal Shudas before Mincha. Lachein Ka'amar, that's why he says, that once the Ovel is in shul for Mincha, he shouldn't leave. Aval but according to us, that we eat Shal Shudas after Mincha, Sarach Leilach Lebeisai Acha Mincha Lechel Sudi Shlishis. The Ovel has to go home to eat Shal Shudas. Ubelayla Yispal Ma'ariv, so now at home, now at night, he should have Ma'ariv at home. V'yikra Megillah bebeisai, and hear the Megillah at home, im yesh lo minyan, if he has a minyan. V'hem lav, if he can't pull together a minyan, yelich lebeis hakneses ba'od yom. So then, says the Mishnah Berurah, what he should do is, he should go back to shul before Ma'ariv, but he should go while it's still Shabbos. V'yeh sham l'tfilu kriyas Megillah, and in this way he could be in shul for both Ma'ariv and Mikra Megillah, because he went back to shul ba'od yom, while it was still Shabbos. And then once he goes home after Megillah, tomorrow morning he shouldn't leave his house. He should only leave to go to shul to hear Megillah if he can't pull together a minyan in his house, like we saw earlier. The Mechaber who's bringing down the Rekeach, he's going according to his Shita in Hilchos Avelus, that we brought down in the beginning of Sif Dalid, the Avelus Noig B'Purim. This whole Ramah that's bringing this Rekeach, that's telling you that, here's a chap. If the Ovel is in Shul Shabbos afternoon for Mincha, and Purim is Matzah Shabbos, so we have a chap, he should stay in Shul for Ma'ariv. That's the Mechaber L'Shitasai that Avelus is Noig on Purim. But according to us, we already saw the Ramah. We're not noyeg Avelis Purim. According to us, the Ovel is always going to go to shul to hear Mikra Megillah, even if he could pull together a minyan in his house, because we hold that Avelis is not noyeg on Purim. How about the Ovel leaving his house on Purim stam for Inyani Rishus? This is all talking about Purim by day. At night, im yesh lo minyan, even according to the Ramah, that we're not noyeg avelis at Purim, balayla im yesh lo minyan yispal v'yikra Megillah bebeisai. He should daven and hear Megillah in his house. V'im ein lo minyan, if he doesn't have a minyan, yispal bebeisai. He should daven at home. V'yelech l'shmai mikra Megillah bebeisai knesses, even according to the Ramah. U'levada kriya lo yetsi b'pesach beisai. At night, he shouldn't leave his house. V'ayim b'der chachayim debiyom tezvav on Shushan Purim lo yelech b'beisai lebeisai knesses hafil l'hispal shachris. The Ovel, even according to the Ramah, the Ovel on Shushan Purim in the morning should not go to shul for davening. But as far as taking off his shoes, the Lavush writes, we don't say the tefillah of tzidek adin by a kever, and we don't say the special kaddish. Kaddish. Okay? Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua Sefuas Parnasset Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the B'Yisrael Tzedek V'Mehera V'Yameinu, and we are rapidly approaching the end of Chelik Vav and the Siyum on Gans Mishnah Berurah. Stay tuned. Be well.